run a company in clean energy and carbon. I'm also owner of another company that provides strategic consulting and coaching on China. I'm setting up a fund with a bunch of contacts on those 4 industries. And I also work with the European Chamber. I'm chairing the Environmental Working Group Shanghai. Yeah, I'm married in China. I've been there for 20 years and I like it. At this moment, actually, I'm not in China. I'm in Belgium, in Edegem, for 1 more month. So if you would like to meet in person, it is very possible. So 3 things that I think are important for you to get a feel of how different China is. First of all, the digitization of the whole value chain. What does it mean for your go-to-market strategy? China is a planned economy. Well, that affects your business strategy. And business partnerships, well, they are, of course, with Chinese characteristics. So what does that mean? China is upgrading its whole industrial value chain. And this is much more impactful than you can imagine. I can share with you a very interesting sharing from the State Council just after COVID in March last year, where they were announcing that they were going to speed up the digitization, which already had started. This is the China 2025 manufacturing, actually. So imagine this, all the state-owned enterprises, private companies, institutes, universities, entrepreneur companies, even the farmers, they are all being connected to one digital system with very high bandwidth. And the data which is available in the country, and as you know, China does monitor data. You can see this very well in how the virus is being managed, what they can do with the data. Well, this data is now being centralized and being made available in a central way to those value chain. And they are igniting entrepreneurial companies to play with the different stakeholders in this industrial value chain to create a systemic upgrade of this value chain over the next 2, 3, 4 years to 2025. So imagine this, all processes, products, cooperations, models, getting access to big data and getting access to artificial intelligence to get an upgrade. So that is what is happening. And it's a planned economy. I'll explain in a minute. It means it is rolled out very systematically. So what does it mean for a go-to-market? Not sure if you know this, but at this moment, you can actually access a lot of people in China very quickly if you use the digital channels. Now, it's not so obvious for a foreign company to just go and access those people. There are indeed very specific rules and regulations, but it is possible in the Chinese way. And this actually means that if you work with the right kind of parties that can give you access, you can go at a much faster speed and at a much lower cost into this market and also understand the market before you go into this market. It also allows you to, over the value chain, in a strategic way, determine which are the places where I'm going to play. And it's important to actually have a multi-point approach and to figure out where can I be a catalyst or a facilitator more than just only a control. If you're a control, you're vulnerable. Although you might think you're in control, actually you're vulnerable. Multi-point means you are much more protected. Now, what is the window of opportunity? You might want to go to China and think in terms of there's a market for me, but you might also think that what is happening there is a bit ahead of a curve. When I arrived in China 20 years ago, they were 10 years behind. When I'm now in China, I see a country where the modern cities are 5 years ahead. Of course, we still have the countryside, which is maybe still 50 years behind, but they all have access to these modern tools. This is why digital farming is going incredibly fast. So how much are you, for example, able to enjoy a systemic upgrade of your processes and actually get an innovative boost working in China? First point. Second point. So China is a planned economy. What does that mean? Well, it means there is no debate between political parties about what is wrong and what is right. Now, this is where I want to also raise the issue of how politics and media are basically talking about China. And by the way, China also talking about the West. It is at this moment not very nice, as you know for sure. But I want to clearly make sure that the business people in China, they are business people just like you, and they want to work and do business. But they also understand what is the context of this plan economy. It's not something you can ignore. It's something you can't row against the flow, but you can definitely get wind under your wings by understanding where things are going. And China works basically very systematically in a triple helix model. So there's a central government, just like Robert showed just now, with goals, with KPI being rolled out. Now, at the provincial levels, at the city levels, at the industrial levels, these are all translated into sub-KPI to roll them out. So for example, certain provinces are going to get a certain requirement. This could be more for one industry or more for one aspect of the country. For example, security of food can be anything. So the different parts of the country have very specific goals and where they need to contribute to where the country is going. And the government, the local government, is basically having this task. Now, the government officials, they go up or down, depending to what extent they can actually help implement the planned economy. And this is very interesting because next to these governments, you then have the institutes, the universities. This is where all the research is happening. And then, of course, you have the industry, which in a very dynamic way tries to understand where are the opportunities that come with this. If I can help the government implement some of these things with some of the research that's going on, or I can innovate, for example, with the institutes to find solutions, then I'm going to get wind under my wings. I'm going to fly. So there is, I always say, China also has CSR, and it's somewhat similar to the concept of CSR that we know in the West. But in China, it's actually country social responsibility. And this is actually at the level of all of these three pillars, and even at the level of the people. This is also why, although China has only one party, they do have a lot of support from the people. Now, if you understand this and you can find a way to work together in these three, with these three stakeholders in this triple helix model, you can get an endorsed and a facilitated rollout. What do I mean with that? If you find a solution in one place and you have a cooperation with the government, you're being endorsed. If you have a local innovation, you're leading. And if you work with local entrepreneurs, you can tap into these most modern aspects of the digital value chain that can help you speed up. Now, if your model works in one place, you don't need to go and promote it, brand it, advertise it in other regions. Although these regions are different, almost like different countries, like Robert explained, the local people there understand from their perspective what they need to do from the planned economy in their region with their challenges, what they need. And they understand how your solution in one place actually can help them. So you're going to get phone calls. Could you come please here and also do the same thing? It surprises me each time when this happens, when we really found a solution that works. 2. 3, partnerships with Chinese characteristics. I want you to be aware that China at this moment is in the Yang Wei period, which means we want to implement or use the foreign things for China's purposes. There was a time in the past where China would be like, oh, this is from abroad. Wow, we want this because this must be much better than we have. So, and over the time, this has changed. China basically now has the opinion on the West and those who come to the West. Well, you want our market, of course, but your solution sometimes is outdated and you don't know this. And also you come with an opinion about how we should be doing things, which is quite annoying because in China, people first keep silent. They don't talk, they listen. And in the West, for example, we tend to start explaining, of course, how we want to help, how we have solutions, but it's just different. It's important to be aware of this. And the 80-20 cooperation transparency. It's something very interesting. So because this is a Chinese way of doing and thinking, you will see that when you work together with Chinese parties, and this is not only with foreigners, also Chinese people under each other, they are kind of putting on the table visibly what they're discussing to work together with you. But they won't talk about 80%, which is most relevant for them, because this is a vulnerability. And of course, this is their opportunity. And they will get an alignment around the 20%, but they will make sure that what you bring is going to give them also the 80%. Now, if you want to work with the Chinese party and you don't know what is the 80%, you're missing the point. They will knowing that. And it's important you know that, because this gives you a chance that you go beyond one cycle. And I will explain this in a minute. Protection via the ecosystem basically means that if you're in this industrial value chain, have multiple control points or touch points, you're going to have different parties you're working with. You might be working with somebody in the government here, and you might be working with an entrepreneur there and with an institute there, and you might work with different people. So once you have a cooperation with Chinese people, you have a contract which clarifies the 20% in the right language to get the right kind of engagement. Then the question always is, so how much of that contract is going to be executed, right? How much can you rely on that? Well, I always say, wait until the big event comes, because the big event is organized. It's very fascinating. So the way it is explained, what is going to be done? And it's beautiful when you see Xi Jinping actually doing that. This is why the Chinese always have these words which sometimes sound bombastic or poetic or whatever, because for Chinese people, these characters, they are alive. Okay, they are representing much more than the words. If we in Belgium, for example, say east, west, home, best, ost, west, west, best, these are just 4 words, but you also know they carry a lot more, right? They carry the whole context of the feeling of being at home and so on. So Chinese language characters basically also carry that in almost all their words. So the way you express your cooperation with which kind of words to which kind of audience shows which kind of commitment you're giving. And that actually is your protection. It is what protects your IP. It's what protects your competitive position. That's why the ecosystem is so important. And this is why the triple helix is so important and the value chain. Now, context instead of time. As I just said, the language is different. Can you imagine? Chinese does not have times. They don't have past time, present tense, future tense. But they have all kinds of words which indicate context. So when you set up a cooperation with Chinese people, they think in terms of context. So we are bringing this to the table, 80-20, remember? Clear and unclear. And you're bringing that to the table, clear and unclear. Now, from the Western perspective, you're going to have like, okay, stage 1, year 1. And then after this year, we're going to review at the end of the year, we're going to go into the next year. And you may have a plan. But remember, the plan is 20%, not 100%. But the Chinese, they also have a plan. And this is the 80%. And they are having a timeline which is based on context. What do I mean with that? So today we work together on these topics. Not when 1 year has passed, but once these things have been achieved, what we have gotten from this cooperation, then this stage is finished. Suddenly you see the Chinese party change their behavior. They go to the next thing. Foreign party always says, what's happening? You're not keeping the agreement. Why are you doing this? And the Chinese party always says, why are you asking this question? Because for them, it is obvious. If you ask this question, basically, you're kind of out of the game because you're not understanding it. So on the other hand, if you, by that time, when this is finished, and you know this as well, because you also think in context, you're going to say, look, we could next work on this kind of cooperation, and you pick up something from their 80. Suddenly, you incredibly increase your position because you understand, you show you understand the game. Now, the game, you've got something unique. You're a foreigner. That means no Chinese can be more foreigner than you, in the same way that I also realize I can never be more Chinese than a Chinese, and I also do not intend to be. If in your strategy you can leverage in and outside of China, you always have an advantage which you will continuously be able to bring to the table. If you're doing something within China only, remember that unless you start innovating locally, unless you are able to adapt your products to the local buyers, local solution selling, whatever innovative solution you have, it's going to be outdated in 1 or 2 years. Unless you innovate locally, and you're going to have something new, which is very interestingly having Chinese characteristics, which is going to surprise you. It keeps surprising me. But those characteristics, they will also be very useful for you to know outside of China. And once you have a cooperation with China, you basically can go to other places. And you can, for example, think in the Belt and Road Initiative, or you can go simply to Latin America or Southeast Asia, because you have something to share in those areas and maybe also something to do together. Now, truth serves a purpose. As I said, there is talking and there is sharing, and there is also my duty. In China, the duty is kind of an accountability. So individual right is kind of an accountability. It's very interesting to discover this. If you ask what is the intrinsic motivation of a Chinese, well, I want this as a person, but as a son of my parents, I want this. As a person working with this government, I want this. So these are part of the motivation. This also means that I'm only supposed to tell you the truth if you are entitled to hear the truth. Because if you are not having this kind of a position with me, you are not really relevant. You're not part of this circle. Then why would I expose myself to you? Why would I reveal myself to you? So it's very important to understand how these things play, to understand how your relationship with the partner really is. And then the peaches and the coconuts. So when Western people come together, they come together like peaches. The skin is very thin on the outside, and very easily it breaks. So when it breaks, you have contact. So you get to know each other very quickly. The meat of the peach starts overlapping. Squeeze, some juice comes out, but the stone in there, the core, doesn't really overlap much. It's hard. Actually, it often not really overlaps. So the way people in the West cooperate is like this. Cooperate together very easily, but there's always some kind of like individualistic approach like you and me. Chinese are like coconuts. When they come together, they bounce. They don't trust each other. They don't trust other people. Very hard to get to know them. Very hard, because this is the outside of the coconut. You have to really break through that coconut. But once you break through, what happens then? There's no stone. There's only liquid. The liquid flows together completely. So when you're working in China and you're able to have this kind of a cooperation, you're going to be a little bit uncomfortable because you are getting certain kind of responsibilities that you need to take care of the other party. It's very strange. You need to take care of a supplier or of a customer if they're in trouble, because they're part of the ecosystem, they're part of the circle. If you're outside the circle, I mean, you're one of 1.4 billion. If you don't have food, you die. But if you're within the circle, that means you won't be killed and you will be protected in this multi-point, because I want to protect you. Now, this is very important because things change so quickly in China. And as Robert also mentioned, there are these lists with invited industries and, for example, industries which are prohibited. And China is very opportunistic. And let's be honest, many countries are like this. There's a regulatory system which kind of indicates what the country focuses on, what they want, what they don't want. And China is very protective in this way, and you need to know this, because you might, for example, be very welcome and start doing something, and you feel great, and then suddenly things start getting harder. For example, specifically in the clean tech, the environmental consultancy and the soil and groundwater, a lot opening in the beginning, but now because the knowledge is available, it suddenly has to be localized, it's protected, it's very difficult. So if you then haven't made it as a coconut to enter the ecosystem, you're vulnerable. If you're part of the ecosystem, you will have discussions with them in a much more transparent way, because you are part of the 80-20 discussion. They'll be telling you, hey, don't you have this kind of knowledge in the West, or don't you have this kind of insight here in China that can help us to do something, you can have actually a totally different kind of cooperation, and you will be guided into that. And that basically means you can go into the next cycle. And you also start becoming part of the discussions of context instead of time. And this is where you can start being ahead of the curve, seeing where are the new opportunities. And they come, of course, with the local clients, local solutions, and they come with the local governments, which are indicating where's the next stage the government wants to take the country. And of course, with the universities, what are we able to do here? Because there's a lot of money being invested in China in some of these new systemic disruptive solutions. So I will end here with ride the wave until you become the wave, because this is from Li Bai. It's a Chinese poet. It was painted by a Japanese painter, and it used in-depth painting techniques from Europe. For me, this is a token that cooperation can be possible, and actually a very nice cooperation. Changfeng Polang basically stands for, if the wind is very strong, the storm is very strong, the waves can actually become very high. And that can be very scary. And the world of today has this kind of challenge. But circular economy and markets are presenting an opportunity to create change. Changes are happening faster than ever. Now, if the wind is very strong and the waves are touching the sky, if you can kind of surf on those waves, you can touch the sky. You can do amazing things. So this is the expression. Remember, east-west, home-west. For the Chinese, this is what's currently happening. They're engaging in the process. You can be part of the people surfing on those waves, but you need to learn how to surf, because falling off a wave, you will be drinking some salty water. Doesn't taste nice, but I think surfing is fun. And this is why I keep having fun in China and working with people that want to do something with China. This is my last slide. These are my contact details. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also have me on WhatsApp and so on.